What is up, maniacs? I am Zach, and I am the Milly Maker Maniac, and we are going to jump into week 3 prep. We had a big week 2, made over 16 grand in week 2, hoping to run it back and hoping to hit that milli. That's the whole point, hitting that milli. All right, so let's go game by game here. What I've got pulled up right now are the game odds, all the Vegas odds, and then I also have my matchup stats that I use, my grades for each team at each position or position group, and then I run those grades against each other and look for some matchup advantages. Gives me a framework to start the week on which offenses I'm hoping to attack, which ones I think have the best chance for that boom game. That's what we're really looking for, are those boom games when we're playing in these large entry tournaments. To win the Milly Maker, you have to hit that boom game to put multiple players in, get all the points possible out of that big game. So that's what we're looking for, those outlier boom games. We're looking for where is it most likely to occur. Now, these matchup stats aren't going to be the end-all be-all, but it gives us a good framework to start building our player pool from. So first game, and I'm only looking at main slate here as well. So for first game is Atlanta and Carolina that we have up. Vegas has us at 43.5. Not a very high total, but not one that's not having any points scored. The team implied totals 23.5 for Atlanta, 19.5 for Carolina. When we look at the matchup stats in this game, we can see it's a lot of positive numbers here for Atlanta. In that top row there, real positive. So Atlanta's looking good. For QB, how I rank these is I look at the positional groupings of offense versus defense, pass versus pass coverage, pass blocking versus pass rush, and receiving grade versus coverage grade. And then I have certain different tiers that I put each in based on previous weeks' number as far as where the tiers of the highest numbers are at. So anyways, if it's light blue, it's +1. If it's white, it's 0. If it's green, it's +2. If it's yellow, it's -1. And if it's orange, it is +3. For quarterbacks, I look at these top 4 categories. So for Penix, this would be matchup advantage of 4+, +4. On the running back, we have a slight disadvantage with a little bit of a downside on run blocking versus run D, and not a big enough number to give us a point on our run versus run D. So slight knock, but with Bijan, he's a guy, depending on what his pricing is, that every week could go off. So that's not a big enough matchup disadvantage to eliminate any of the players there. And then their defense has a decent advantage. I actually like to see big positive numbers at QB and running back. And you also notice that I don't have wide receivers here. The reason I don't have wide receivers is because my wide receivers are basically going to be coming from my QB pool. So I'm going to be stacking with my main QBs. So the ranking for me, if it's a good setup for the quarterback, it gives receivers on that team a chance to have a decent week. And they're obviously like the best grade for receivers would be like receiving grade versus coverage grade. But those matchups are so different from play to play, depending on who's on who. And you could have one person on that team that really pulls up these coverage grades for a team where the other side is actually a weakness. So for me, building this into the quarterback ranking is enough of an indication for the wide receiver component for me. So I'm just building that into the QB. If it's a good week for the QB, then I like the receivers for that team as well. So Atlanta, I'll be looking at a lot of Drake London, getting Darnell and Mooney, some Kyle Pitts. Like all of that is building into wide receiver and tight end for me. So that going a lot off of my QB grades there. But I actually would like to see the defense be a negative that just sets up for more of a shootout. If both offenses have an advantage and the defenses are bad, that is one of those games that could lead to a lot of points. But we have a really positive QB score, pretty much a neutral running back score playing against a defense that they have an advantage on. So like to see that. Atlanta will definitely be a team that I will be running a lot of Penix stacks with. He will probably be one of my multiplier lineups. So either my 5X or my 10X lineups where I am trying to target an offense that I really like, or a couple offenses I really like, and stack those up. So if those teams go off, I'll have a good enough lineup to hit that 3X or 5X or whatever multiplier I'm playing there. Carolina, they're going to be at a disadvantage pretty much on everything. Not too bad except for pass blocking. Most of it's pretty neutral. I think this game, the thing that's really been killing Carolina is this pass blocking. Bryce Young, I don't think is playing that bad. It's just he has zero time back there. They're not doing him any favors. This isn't as scary of a matchup for them as previous weeks as far as pass rush goes. So I think that, I think it is a pretty neutral matchup for him. I'm not going to have a ton of Bryce Young, but I'll mix him into a few tournament lineups. I'll mix in some Chuba at my running back position as well. It's like Atlanta's not a scary defense, but you do expect Atlanta to come out on top. If this is a back and forth game, I would still think I'd rather have the Atlanta side, but I will have in tournaments, large field stuff. I'll throw in a few Bryce Young lineups and stacking it with a few of his receivers and tight ends and Chuba as well. All right, our next matchup is the Packers versus Cleveland. Packers are showing a implied team total of 25.5. Cleveland at 16.5. Cleveland will just quickly do Cleveland. I'm not playing any Cleveland players this week. They're extremely negative across the board. They might have one guy, maybe one guy that finishes top 20 at their position this week. I think it's very unlikely that a boom game comes out of that. So I'm just not touching that. I will be having Green Bay in the defensive slot for me a lot. Now, there actually isn't a very big advantage for Green Bay against Cleveland. Cleveland's actually been a pretty solid defense. They got an advantage with the pass rush here, and then a little bit of a disadvantage with the receivers and pass game here, but I think I'm just going to pretty much avoid this. One of the things I was thinking was, is this going to be a Josh Jacobs game? It's always possible with Josh Jacobs, but their run blocking has actually been pretty poor so far this year. They have the biggest disadvantage of run block versus run defense of anybody this week, of -31. So I'm just not going to touch this game, actually, the more I look at it. There's not any concentration at receiver for Green Bay, so it's really an absolute dart throw. And if I'm not stacking this game, I don't really want to have a random dart throw in there. I'd prefer to have my dart throws in games that I feel like are going to have a lot of points in them. Those are the scenarios where it's more likely to get a Wan'Dale Robinson type outcome like we had last week. That game environment looked a lot more like something that could become a shootout than what this game looks like. All right, so next we'll move on to Jacksonville and Houston. Jacksonville is definitely disappointed so far this year. They have a disadvantage at pass block versus pass receiver, and then pass rush, and then slight advantages everywhere else, and then solid in the run game. Pretty much the only thing I'm going to look at out of this game is going to be Travis Etienne, maybe some Bashal Tutin. I don't know. I just don't think he's going to get enough volume yet to feel like you can start him in even a dart throw. I prefer a running back to not do my dart throws and have guys that I'm pretty confident in a good matchup and good volume. So I'd be leaning more towards Travis Etienne here. Maybe I'll throw Bashal Tutin into a couple lineups. Beyond that, I don't think I'm really going to touch it. That my only thing is there is a lot of negative talk about Brian Thomas Jr. this week with not seeming willing to catch balls going over the middle. You might think that they might try to go out and future him just to put that to bed, but I don't know. It just doesn't look like it's setting up that well for that type of scenario. Houston is a solid defense, even though it does show a slight matchup advantage across the board. Jacksonville really, these grades are based off of who they've played so far too. If you'll score better if you are playing a lesser opponent, and they've so far played against the Carolina defense and the Cincinnati defense. So it's not like they've played anybody good. I just feel like these numbers might be skewed a little bit because of their couple matchups up front. And then you can see, like, I don't see Houston having a good game here at all. They have really bad matchup stats across the board. So I think this game is one of those games that's actually likely to hit the under. So I'm not going to want too much of it. I might look at both defenses. Jacksonville's D looks real attractive in this. So Jacksonville's D will be one that'll definitely be in my player pool. So it'll probably be Jacksonville D and Travis Etienne coming out of that game for me. I love Nico as a player, but he has to have a boom game where he's priced. So I probably won't be getting any Nico as well if I'm not going to do any CJ Stroud lineups, which I will not. Let's move on down here to the Cincinnati, Minnesota game. This is interesting because now we have Jake Browning versus Carson Wentz. I actually think this game's going to be pretty ugly. If I got any pieces out of this, it would probably be, I don't think I'm going to play either quarterback. Browning is in consideration. It's a really low total game now. Obviously, without Joe Burrow, it changes everything for the Bengals. Maybe I'll do a few Browning lineups, but my initial thought is Chase Brown and T. Higgins would be the two guys I would probably want the most out of here. Jamar, I don't like playing unstacked at his price, so if I do some Browning lineups, I would obviously mix him in there. But Higgins is a guy that can have a boom game any week, and it's a pretty positive matchup. Is actually one of the highest QB scores of the week. Actually, he had 6. Part of that, obviously, though, is grading. These are team grades, so it's a lot of that is grading Joe Burrow. But yeah, maybe it is actually looking just so positive. And Minnesota's D hasn't been great yet this year. You don't love Brian Flores versus a backup quarterback. Like, that doesn't sound like an environment of generating a lot of points. So I'd be intrigued in both of these defenses. I think there's probably going to be turnovers in this game. I actually feel very confident about there being turnovers in this game, which could lead to points for either offense. I think I'm just going to end up with Higgins and Chase Brown coming out of this game, and pretty much that'll be it. I'll probably build maybe 4 or 5 low-priced Cincinnati lineups with Browning. But beyond that, I'm not going to have much of this game. We'll see where Jordan Mason is priced. Let's actually pop over and see where Jordan Mason is priced. With Jones being out, if Mason is super cheap, he could be in play. At 5,400, he's in play. Do you think with a backup quarterback? Yeah, against Cincy's D too. Like, that is definitely a consideration. So I'm glad we went and looked at that. Jordan Mason's in play for sure. We'll mix in some Jordan Mason. Let's look at it's a neutral matchup is what it's showing. Slightly better, but you would expect it's kind of a perfect storm for Mason, honestly. You got Carson Wentz out, or you got, JJ McCarthy out, Carson Wentz playing. So you would expect that they would try to run the ball more, take some pressure off of their backup quarterback, kind of slow the game down a little bit. Hope their defense can get some turnovers against Browning, who just threw three picks in the last game. Yeah, so I like Mason to get a lot of touches. Mason will definitely be in my core running backs now that we talk it out more. All right, I'm glad we talked through that. Let's move on to New England and Pittsburgh. The total of this game, 44.5. Team totals 21.5, 22.5. Vegas does not think this is going to be a big game, but we can see actually pretty big matchup advantages for the passing game. Yeah, a 4 and a 2, which are two of the higher numbers on the week as far as matchup advantages for quarterbacks. Slightly negative in the run game for New England. This feels like a Drake May +1 type week. I do think people are going to assume Pittsburgh has a good defense, and we all thought that coming into the year, but made Justin Fields look like a hero and then made me look like an idiot in week 2 because my highest roster quarterback was Justin Fields, and I had Breece Hall and Garrett Wilson, and against the Bills, they did nothing, who just gave up 40 points to the Ravens in week 1. So to me, my biggest takeaway out of that outcome is that Pittsburgh's D isn't that good. They lost to Seattle this past week. Kenneth Walker ran through them like nothing. So I'll definitely mix in some Ramondre. He seemed to get the vast amount of the workload. Seems like Henderson is in the doghouse a little bit. We'll see how long that lasts. Like, he's a more explosive player and the guy I would want in best ball. And, down the end of the year, but we're playing just a 1-week season this week. It's week 3. I think Ramondre is going to continue to get the workload until we start to see if he has any fumble issues, but he had a big week last week. So Ramondre will be in our running back pool. I have a hard time believing in Pittsburgh offense, but I do think I'll actually do some Rodgers lineups this week. New England's defense hasn't looked great. We can see that, there are a solid pass advantages in this game for Pittsburgh, so we can do a couple Rodgers stacks. That's definitely a way we can get Contrarian to the field as well. It looks like a decent matchup. So Rodgers, DK, and Freiermuth, DK, and maybe Jalen Warren, DK, and Calvin Austin. We can build a couple double stack lineups there. So if Rodgers decides to be this week's Russell Wilson, then we got some tournament plays. He won't be a core play for me, but I'll build somewhere in the ballpark of 4 or 5 large field tournaments lineups with them. And if they go off, then we'll have some shot at some bigger. We'll have a lot of leverage on the field that we could definitely bank one if that's how it plays out. So sneaky little game here. I will be playing pieces from both games. Definitely will be playing Drake May. He will be one of my core quarterbacks for sure. The tough part about playing May is he's kind of like Josh Allen in that it's hard to stack him. And Lamar Jackson too. Like, you don't know. It's so spread out that even when they have boom games, lots of times other guys just have like top 15 weeks. They don't have those top 5 weeks at their position that we need. So maybe I like to play Drake May skinny with like one other teammate or just naked. So we'll probably play around with that. And then we have Pittsburgh. If I'm playing Pittsburgh, like, Rodgers is the opposite. If Rodgers has a big week, he's pretty much always going to pull people along with him. Like, if Rodgers is a top 3 quarterback, it's likely that he's going to have a top 5 positional player come along with him, more than likely a wide receiver. And lots of times it'll be 2 in the top 10 where it'll bring along like top wide receiver and top tight end, or even a running back like Jalen Warren if he caught a couple of those passes. So that's how we would play. Like, your quarterback type matters. With pocket quarterbacks like Rodgers, who's not really going to get anything on the ground, and somewhat concentrated target volume, we want to double stack and even triple stack those lineups, because if we're right at quarterback and he goes off, then he's going to bring people along with him, where Drake May can have 2 rushing touchdowns and 80 rushing yards and only have like 150 yards passing. So he doesn't necessarily bring people along with him that you need to have. He can be a guy that you can play naked. All right, let's move on to our next game. We got the Rams and the Eagles. Interestingly enough, the pass game, it's a -4 for Jalen Hurts. But with the Eagles, you kind of got to take that with a grain of salt, because they are so dependent on the run. You also have the tush push. So when it comes to fantasy points, it's not necessarily about being the better passing offense. It's about scoring fantasy points. So Jalen Hurts he's a really solid floor play, a guy that I actually like in cash almost every single week. This week might not be the week because they have such a bad disadvantage at each spot for passers. It's not really a smash week for the Eagles, but I'll build 4 or 5 lineups with the Eagles every single week, just because they are so good that they can go off any week. Hurts will definitely be in some of my tournament lineups, but he will not be a core play for me this week. The Rams, it looks like a real big advantage with their pass game versus coverage, which I find interesting. You'd think actually that Philly's coverage would have a pretty high rank. Let's actually look at some of these grades here. Looking for the Rams, LAR. Here we go. They have a very, very high pass offense, so pass grade. Let's look at Phillies. Or we got to look at their coverage grade. Let me freeze this top row. All right. Coverage grade. They're actually somewhat towards the top, about middle of the pack is how they're grading out in coverage. All right, interesting. I think it's just a really high grade for the Rams passing offense is really why we're getting that such a big number there. Interesting thing. So normally I'm kind of like last week, Puka had a solid week, but you didn't need him in week 2. It's like he's 7,600, but you have 1, 2, 3, 4 guys that were cheaper that scored more points than him. And so the pricing matters a lot when we're looking at DFS. So not playing Nuka last week, playing Puka last week was the correct play. That's what you should have done. Even though he's wide receiver 6, he was still the wrong play in DFS because there were guys that finished ahead of him. And even if he is wide receiver 1, he's got to be wide receiver 1 by a big chunk. Now, if I'm playing lineups with Matthew Stafford in them, I would definitely want to include him. But outside of that, I just don't, it doesn't make sense to, because the scenario, there was only one time last year where a receiver above 7,500 that cost 7,500 was a must have to win the Milly Maker when they were wide receiver 1, just because of the cost, the opportunity cost that you have. You don't have the ability to get other wide receivers or more talent, more steady plays, upside plays at other positions. So maybe I will build some Stafford stacks when I see this in large field, because I think the general public is going to think that this is a bad matchup against Philadelphia, so they'll be very low owned. So if they do go off, that gives me a really good shot at just like jumping up leaderboards. A lot of people are going to have Puka, but if Puka is wide receiver 1 and Devontae is wide receiver 2, or in that, wide receiver 7 or something along those lines, and Matt Stafford is QB2 or QB1, like that stack is going to be a stack that not a lot of people have, just because of that matchup. So that could get us a lot of leverage on the field. So because of that, in large field, I will be playing some of these stacks. Pretty much going to be fading Philly. I'll build a few Jalen Hurts lineups, but not many. Interesting game there. Probably don't want either of these defenses either. Just, it's unlikely. There is a big pass rush advantage for Philly, so that's definitely something to consider. But Stafford's pretty good about not turning the ball over. So I don't think a lot of turnovers come out of this game. I think it's unlikely that it'll outdo. So we'll probably fade both those defenses as well. All right, here's a sneaky game. Moving on to the Jets and the Buccaneers. Jets dropped down a ton on their implied total this week, down to 18.5. Last week, these were all big green numbers. Changed a little bit after not playing the Steelers week 1. They were playing Tampa. I expected Tampa to actually have quite a bit of matchup advantage here. They're going to be pretty popular with this implied total of 26.5. When we look at their matchup grades at quarterback, it's actually a -1. The Jets, their pass versus coverage grade is pretty high as well. So I will build some Fields lineups, but he will not be in my cash lineup like he was last week. And it's going to be, minimal, maybe 3 lineups that are Justin Fields lineups. But mix in a little Garrett Wilson. He seems to have, he would have a pretty good advantage there this week. So he's a guy that could go off, and Justin Fields doesn't necessarily have, a top 10 week. I'll definitely have some Garrett Wilson. I will go back to Breece Hall, even though it's a slightly bad advantage, -2, but these grades aren't too bad. They're just on the edge of being ones that I count against. Even though he had a really, really bad week 2 and killed me as he was my highest rostered running back last week. Thankfully, we banked the big one, but if we wouldn't have banked that big one, all my cash lineups did very poorly because of Breece Hall. But I will go back to him some this week. I think he will have very low roster percentage compared to the rest of the field because everybody is back on the Jets suck just after 1 week being like, oh, they have it all figured out. So the masses are going to overreact to what happened in the previous week. We'll try to keep a level head about it. I don't think they're world beaters, but we have seen that they are capable of big games. Tampa Bay's defense is not one that scares you. Therefore, we're going to build some tournament lineups, and we'll mix in Breece Hall and Garrett Wilson across our player pool. Tampa, I am going to play Baker lineups every single week just because he is a guy that, regardless of the matchup, is capable of throwing 3 or 4 touchdowns and for 400 yards, and his target concentration is pretty small. Really, you have, like, I'll mix in some Rachaad White into some of these lineups, but you have Rachaad White, Bucky, and then you have obviously Mike Evans, Emeka Egbuka, and then Cade Otton. That's pretty much that's your full player pool. That's really the only potential names you think that could go top 5 at their position. Obviously, Rachaad White is a stretch for that, but we saw in last night's game, he did score a touchdown and had a pretty solid night. So he's capable of that, and he is also someone that is likely to catch a touchdown from Baker. So, we would score twice if that scenario happens. So because of that, I will be playing plenty of Mayfield lineups. I don't think he'd be one of my multipliers this week because the matchup isn't great. I will be playing a lot of Bucky. Bucky will be one of my core plays. We can see here the run game is pretty solid for him. So, yeah, Bucky will be one of my core plays. Be mixing in. I'll primarily just have Evans and Egbuka in Baker stacks, but I will have a decent amount of those in my large field tournaments. All right, moving on to the next game. We got the Colts against the Titans. The Colts are now the best team in the league. Everyone knows that. Daniel Jones is the MVP. Everyone knows that. But they do look really solid. They really do look solid. I have not built many Daniel Jones lineups yet. I was on it in week 1 and then talked myself out of it. I'm sad that I did. But I will mix in some Daniel Jones lineups. I love Tyler Warren this week. They kept his pricing at $4,400, I believe. Let's go over there and check that out. Yeah, he's at $4,400, so that's still way too cheap. We will have a ton of Tyler Warren in our lineups this week. We will build some Daniel Jones lineups. We will have Jonathan Taylor will definitely be one of our core plays this week. Really nice matchup there. Run block versus run D and run grade versus run D. Looking really solid. Positive across the board. No huge advantages. But yeah, I like this offense a lot. We'll get some Daniel Jones stacks. We will get some, we'll mix in everybody. It'll be Jonathan Taylor, Josh Downs, Michael Pittman, Tyler Warren. We'll get a little bit of Pierce. I'll even throw some Adonai Mitchell into a few of my cheaper lineups. So yeah, like that. Also really like Indy's D this week. These matchup grades are rough for the Titans. They're just going to have tough matchup stats every week. They just are an inferior team, especially on the line, it appears. I think Cam Ward is solid. I think he's a good player. He's just in a tough situation. I'm not going to play Tony Pollard. I Tony Pollard can be top 10. Yes, I have no doubt about that. I think he's going to have very few weeks where he's top 5. And when we're building tournament lineups, I need to have upside to be top 5. He's more of like a safe play and like a consideration in cash, but I don't think he's a DFS play. I think he's a much better redraft league player than he is ever going to be in DFS. So I'm not going to touch that. Ridley, I'll get some of. Epic Eye Manor, I'll get some as well. Cam Ward, I just don't see that top 5 upside yet. He'll have some games, but he just doesn't have a supporting cast around him where I think it's likely that he has those like big games unless they're in comeback mode, and even then, I don't think they have what it takes to really put together those top 5 QB performances. So for that reason, we are out on the Titans for the most part. I'll mix in some Indy D as well. All right, let's look at Vegas and the Commanders. Now, what it's sounding like Jaden Daniels is going to play. If he is going to play, he'll definitely be in my player pool. I like Debo out of this game. I like McLaurin to have his first big game with kind of the mini bye that they have after coming off of the Thursday night game. That was a super tough matchup. Even these grades being there after having to play the Packers, I'm very interested in. So Jaden with McLaurin and Debo, it's pretty much, and Ertz, those would pretty much be the 3 guys to mix and match with. I might throw a little Ja'Cory Krosky merit in there with Eckler being tearing his Achilles, unfortunately. But yeah, I think the most likely thing to happen is that they rely on the pass game here. And it's Daniels to Ertz and McLaurin and Debo. And yeah, I think also Debo is going to probably get more play in the run game as well with the injury to Eckler. So I definitely would run that stack quite a bit. That might be one of my multiplier lineups. I like Daniels quite a bit there. Let's see what his price is this week. Let's actually just look at what all of their pricing is. Go over here, Washington. So Ertz is 4,200, definitely in play. Daniels at 7,000. Corey Krosky at 55. I'd rather play Mason than Krosky Merritt there. Mason at 5,400. But yeah, like these prices. Yeah, give me Debo, give me Terry, give me that. Yep, we like this. So Jaden Daniels skinny stacks. So Daniels Samuel, Daniels McLaurin, Daniels Ertz. Double stacks, Samuel and Ertz, McLaurin and Ertz, Samuel and McLaurin. And then the triple stack with Samuel, McLaurin, and Ertz. We will have multiple lineups with all those combinations. Like the feel of that a lot, actually. Now, on the bring back, playing against the Raiders, I like Geno in this game. Let's go back here and see what the grades are. Really solid, actually. So this be rated as a 4. So this looks like a great spot for the Raiders. This might be one of our sneaky games. This might be one of the games that we're all over this week to be a shootout. Genty at 6,700. We love that. Let's look at this matchup. Ooh, actually disadvantage, a -2 showing against Washington. So that is something to be aware of. But they've had 2 tough matchups to start the year as far as run defenses, playing the Chargers and the Seahawks. So that might be skewed a little bit. It feels like watching the game last night, Genty just looks like he is him to me, like just great contact balance, very explosive. Obviously hasn't shown anything yet, but it hasn't had any big games yet. Let's see what he finished with last night. But like I see that coming. Yeah, 11-43. Yeah, I kind of like Genty smash here. I think this could be the breakout week. The wide receiver, Jacoby, obviously is a great value. 11-3. Or we put up 12-8 and 17-7. Thing about Jacoby is he'll probably be in my cash lineup this week. Like you can count on him for these type numbers. Boom games aren't as common, but we'll consider it. We'll keep an eye on it. Dante Thornton hasn't done much yet. Trey Tucker's been playing a lot more than I anticipated. Didn't have great week last week. Beck done anything yet? Or Best, sorry. So, yeah, it kind of looks like the obvious bring back is Bowers. So I probably will be running. I like the idea of Jaden lineups as long as he plays with Genty and Bauer comebacks. And then we'll build a few Geno lineups as well. That's a game we definitely like. One that we'll be smashing a little bit. All right, we got the Chargers versus the Broncos. Broncos D has not been great yet this year. And the matchup stats bear that out here, showing a massive advantage at QB. This is a 6 spot at QB. So Herbert stacks are going to be one of our core plays this week for sure. Herbert and Ladd, Herbert and Keenan, Herbert and Johnston, Quentin Johnson, QJ. Yeah, we like that a lot. We'll mix and match those, triple stack it, double stack it, and solo stack it. We will make the Broncos prove that they are good. Everybody thinks that they're good, but the matchup stats do not show that. So like that a lot. And on the flip side, it's looking rough for Bo Nix so far this year. He had a decent fantasy day last week, but played awful in the second half. You can see this minus 45 pass versus coverage. That's by far the worst on matchup stat there this week. That's rough. That is rough. No, thank you. No, thank you on Bo Nix. I think we will pass. I've faded him so far this year. Eventually, he'll have some boom games, but I think he's just trying to do too much early on in the season. He needs to let the game come to him a little bit more. I think eventually he'll figure it out, but I'm not going to bet on that this week. So yeah, I'm pretty much all over the Chargers passing game. Not as much on the running game. Will make sense some Amari and Hampton, but primarily Herbert stacks, and we're going to be doing a good chunk of those. Going to fade the Broncos again this week. Not interested in playing either of these defenses either. Yep. Basically, Chargers passing game with a little bit of Omari, and that's what we're doing in that game. This game is sneaky to me. Seattle, the Seahawks versus the Saints. 24.5 team total for Seattle and 16.5 for New Orleans. I will be playing some Sam Darnold stacks, a good chunk actually. Good leverage on the field. I like the stacks there too. I like getting Horton in there with JSN. Mix in some Barner. We can also mix in Kenneth Walker into some of those lineups. But I think this could be one of those weeks where Darnold throws 3 or 4 touchdowns like he had last year, and that's one that the field will not be on. I think JSN is a stud. Let's see what the pricing is for these guys this week too. Okay, Darnold's basically free at 5,100. Kenneth Walker, very affordable at 5,800. I maybe mix in Charbonnet into a couple of my large field tournaments that I have that are building with Darnold, but only in those lineups. I think it's very unlikely that he has a boom week. He can always have a usable week if you're in redraft or in best ball or whatever, but we're not. We're playing 1 week. We need a guy that can be top 5. Unless Walker gets hurt, I don't think it's Charbonnet. Walker, I still think, could be a top 5 back in any given week, despite the split. JSN at 6,500 is still way too cheap. We will have a ton of JSN. He'd probably be in our cash lineup as well. And then Cooper Kupp, I'm only playing him in stacks with Darnold. I think he's washed and more of like a role player now. Love Cooper Kupp, but just his time has passed. I'll put him into some of my Darnold lineups. Beyond that, I'm not interested. Horton at 3,400. I will be using him in my Darnold lineups and across the field. He will be my go-to punt play at 3,400 if I need somebody at tight or at wide receiver, or even in the flex if I build a more of a studs type lineup. All right. On the New Orleans side, decent outlook for Kamara. Passing game isn't a huge disadvantage, but you got Spencer Rattler. So for me, the 2 main guys that I'd be interested in for the comeback on New Orleans, The main guys would be at tight end, and Juwan Johnson still at 3,900, which is crazy cheap. He's tight end 1 right now. And Kamara can consider some Shaheed and Olave. They're so cheap that you could mix them in here a little bit, but Shaheed, there's more upside to. I'd lean more towards Shaheed than Olave because I think Shaheed has a better chance of catching that like 50-plus yarder that, all of a sudden he gets over 100 yards and a touchdown or two. I think he's more likely to do that. Olave is more of a volume guy, but he's got to get to 100 yards to really give us anything worthwhile in a tournament lineup. I'll mix them in, but not a ton. Not a ton. All right. Here's going to be probably the favorite game of the week for everybody. Based on the Vegas odds, showing somewhere between 49 and 50.5 points. They're both at a 24.5 implied team total. All over Dallas. Dallas made me a lot of money last week. Hopefully they can do it again this week. So we will have a ton of Dak and CD and George Pickens. We'll have some Javonte in there. We will have some Devontae Turpin in there. We'll have a ton of Jake Ferguson as well. Comeback for Chicago. Let's look at the pricing in this game as well. Let's just look at Dallas for now. 8K. So Lamb, I will pretty much just use in these stacks. Pickens, though, I'll have him across the board. Tolbert is interesting. It's on the field a decent amount last week. Turpin, let's see. Saying about his injury. No info yet. We'll keep an eye on that. But definitely Pickens. I mean, the main stack is Lamb, Pickens, and Ferguson, and Javonte Williams. Those are the main guys. And large field stuff, we can consider Turpin and Tolbert. But really, it's those 4 guys that we would be messing with. But like the pricing, where did they got Ferguson at? Yeah, Ferguson at 4K. So he's definitely in play as well. Yeah, I think this offense could be getting hot. Let's ride along with it. They seem like they are trying to be, the guys are locked in on being a competitive team. Seems like they got some belief that they can make it happen despite losing Micah. Yeah, I like their offense. They feel like last year's Bengals to me, where they're going to have one of the best offenses in the league, score a ton of fantasy points, and be in a ton of shootouts, but probably be around a 500 football team because their defense is quite porous. And we know we're playing a bad defense, so Chicago we definitely want to consider. Caleb is super cheap, 5,600. Swift at 5,600 we can consider. Rome, Moore, not ready for Burden yet. We'll mix in some Zacchaeus at 3,400. That's pretty solid there. Let's see what Zacchaeus has done. Yeah, 8-2, 4-1, but he's on the field enough. 5 and 7 targets at 3,400. That's something that we want to mix into our player pool for some punts. I'd still rather have Horton, though. Horton, I think, has more upside. Colston Loveland has done nothing yet, so probably will fade that for now. So yeah, primarily it's going to be, for me, it'll be Moore and Odunze that I'll be mixing in as the comeback, but I will definitely build some Caleb lineups. Let's look at these matchup scores for them. Actually, decent matchup for the passing game and a solid matchup for the running game. So we'll build some Caleb lineups. I like the Dallas side of this better. Comeback, my favorite comeback would be Odunze and DJ Moore. But yeah, we'll be building a ton of Dallas stacks. That'll be one of the core plays this week for sure. All right, 2 more games. Hang in there. We're almost to the finish line, my friends. All right, so Arizona and San Francisco. Brock Purdy is going to be out again. Arizona hasn't really showed out yet. Decent advantages in the passing game. Kyler's a guy that I like to always have at least a few lineups of, but he's never going to be one of my core plays. I think he's a guy that can win you, can have those big weeks and win you a Milly Maker. So I'm going to make sure that I always am playing him, and the target concentration is very concentrated there. It's basically Marvin Harrison Jr. and Trey McBride and James Conner. Really don't even need to build any other pieces in, like Trey Benson, maybe Michael Wilson. But really, it's those three guys. So those stacks are easy to build. So I'll mix in a few into my tournaments, but never going to be a core play because Kyler is just so. Most weeks he's going to be down. He'll have a few boom games each year, but he hasn't been a real solid fantasy quarterback over the last couple of years. Mac Jones balled out last week. Looks like a positive, a neutral pass advantage coming up against Arizona. Arizona's defense actually seems like it's a little bit better this year. Actually, it seems solid so far, but haven't had a real test yet playing the Saints and playing the Panthers. So that could be skewed a little bit. I will definitely. Christian McCaffrey is more expensive this week. I might have him in cash. We'll see what the field is thinking at that price point. And I'll mix him into some tournaments too, but at that price point, it's a lot less attractive as what it was the last couple weeks. So I'll probably be on Pearsall and Jennings will probably be the biggest I come out of this game. Let's quickly look at pricing for San Francisco. Let's see where Mac is at 5,000. So he jumped up 1,000. Pearsall and Jennings are still very affordable though. Yeah, McCaffrey at 8,200. A little bit different ball game than the last few weeks. So primarily out of this game, Pearsall and Jennings are going to be the people that I'll be have an interest in. Last game of the week, we have the Giants versus the Chiefs. I like the Chiefs to get a little bit right in this game, but I think that the Chiefs defense is not nearly as good as it was last year, and the matchup stats kind of bear that out. There is a +3 for the Giants. I think a few more people are going to be on Russell Wilson this week after he was the quarterback you needed to have in the Milly Maker. Or wait, do they have they might have the Sunday night game. They do have the Sunday night game. Okay, so never mind. We are not going to look at that game. So let's go ahead and build one lineup, and then we'll get out of here. Go over back here and look at most positive QB grades, and we'll just build one with our top guy. Dallas it is. That's what I was thinking. So let's build a Dallas lineup. We're going to go big here. We're going to try to turn this 17K that we made last week. We're going to try to turn that into the Milly with this lineup right here. We're going to this game. We got Dak. We will just build a super stack here. This is the Cowboys scoring. We don't want DJ. This is the Cowboys going off on Chicago. This is like the same thing that the Lions did to Chicago last week. We're going the onslaught lineup. We're going to do an Odunze comeback. Except I want him at wide receiver, not at the flex. So there we go. We're going to say that this is a 42-31 final score. Odunze with 2 touchdowns. Dak Prescott with 4. 2 to Lamb, 1 to Pickens, 1 to Ferguson. Actually, let's say 2 to Pickens because that'll be better. And 1 to Lamb. And Javonte with 1 rushing touchdown. Actually, 2 rushing touchdowns. We got to get to 6 touchdowns somehow. 2 rushing touchdowns for Javonte. That's how our week played out. That is our $1 million lineup. When you're building these lineups, you have to think of outlier outcomes. And Dak Prescott, like none of the projections are going to say Dak Prescott throws for 400 yards and 4 touchdowns. But let's see what he did last week. He threw for 360 and 2. Like that wasn't it. To add 2 touchdowns onto that, that's not crazy. It's not crazy at all. And when we look at Chicago's defense, they just gave up 52 points. We don't give there's no indication that they should be a better defense or a worse matchup than the Giants, where the Giants have a great pass rush. So I think that this is obviously the 404 is not the likely outcome, but we're building this lineup as if it is the outcome. Those are the type of outlier scenarios we're trying to consider. and think about when we're trying to win these tournaments. Okay, so we have 6 players in one lineup. Makes it a lot easier to build when you have that kind of setup. Let's just go over and look at running back. We'll pull up everybody again. We got an average player remaining of 4,900. Ooh. At defense, who did Houston play? That was who I really I remember jumping out to me as a good defensive. I think it was Green Bay, right? Oh yeah, Houston plays Jacksonville. So we're gonna go ahead and put that. We'll go ahead and put the Jags in. That was a sneaky one. I like that a lot at 2,800. So that gives us 6K per our next 2. So what do we got at running back? We could go higher end here. Can Jonathan Taylor go back-to-back weeks at wide receiver 1? It's possible. Man, Genty really jumped out to me as somebody that I think has a big week coming. Jacobs were a no on this week. Brown were on. Like in this range, to me, it would be Bijan. He's going to be probably the most popular guy against Carolina. Saquon, not this week. I'm not playing any Saquon. Don't love that matchup. Taylor, definitely it's somebody that could be RB1. Let's go Genty. So it leaves us with 5,300 in our flex. Ramondre jumps out in that range. Yeah, we like the matchup for Ramondre. Pittsburgh seems to be a funnel for fantasy points for running backs. He seems to have the core workload. I think he will be pretty low owned because of the split. There we go. There is a $1 million lineup. The Cowboys go off in a shootout against Chicago. Odunze scores twice, and the Cowboys score 6 touchdowns. Ramondre Stevenson runs for 102, and Ashton Genty has his breakout game of the season, 150 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 50 yards in the air. An absolute beast against Washington. And the Jaguars get a pick 6 and 6 sacks against CJ Stroud. There is $1 million, my friends. All right, I appreciate you all tuning in. Smash that subscribe button. Tell your friends about us. And good luck this week. We will have our player pool out later in the week. Check that out. Thanks, my friends.